and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be Sewing for Noobs episode 5, and today we are going to talk about fabric. It's our last kind of talky video before we actually start our first project. We are going to crack on with the sewing machine very soon. I'm very excited. Are you excited? I am. So, but today we have to talk about fabric. It's a very important topic. You will have to choose your fabric for your first project very soon, and it's no easy task. So knowing a bit about fabric is always a good thing. The more you know about fabric and how it behaves and how you understand how it behaves will enable you to make the best choice for your project. I'm not going to talk to you about types of fabric with fiber content and stuff like that, simply because it would take way too much time. So what we're going to see today is how fabric is made in general. So there's 3 different categories, so obviously a lot smaller now, and it will really enable you to understand the basics of fabric. But before we start, we are going to start with a few terms that you're going to hear a few times in this video, and just giving you a small explanation about each of them. So the first one is going to be the warp and the weft. Very funny looking names, but these are technical terms for the thread in your fabric. So your fabric is made up of a multitude of threads, and you have some running vertically and some running horizontally. Your vertical threads are going to be called the warp. We can also exchange that name for the grain or the grain line. The grain line is extremely important in patterns. Here I have my little templates, and you will see on your pattern pieces an arrow. You always have one. This is the grain line, is the direction of the grain line. So you have to match your pattern to the grain, but I'll show you later on with this and these how it does when you cut on the grain and when you don't. Because that will enable you to understand a bit more what's going on. And then the weft. So the wefts are all those threads that are horizontal, that are going from left to right. They can also be called the cross grain because they're running perpendicular to the grain line. The next term is going to be the bias direction, or bias for short, and the bias is going to run at a 45-degree angle from the bias or the cross grain. So it's going to be like this. So imagine your fabric is like this. This is roughly 45 degree. That's going to be your bias direction. So in some fabric, the bias is going to be where you have the most stretch. I'll show you later on, once we've talked about woven fabric, how it's important. The next term that you need to know is selvage. Selvage refers to the sides of your fabric, simply because it's woven a different way. All you need to know is that the weave is a lot tighter, and that's to enable your fabric to stay put, it won't fray. And as well as the selvages are going to run parallel to the grain line or the warp thread. So here is, if my grain line is here, my selvage should be parallel to that line. And that makes up the sides of your fabric on either side. Okay, so now to the different types of fabric, or the different categories of fabric. So you have 3 of them. You have woven fabric, you have knit, and you will have non-woven fabric. I've left down in the description box some links for some resources, because obviously I wanted to make sure that I didn't say anything stupid to you, so I did a bit of research. I've put them down below, so if you're interested on knowing a bit more about fabric and how it's made and textile in general, you can have a look. So for woven fabric, you have to imagine your loom, and you're going to have a multitude of threads that are going to be spread across that loom. And these threads are going to make up the vertical lines of your fabric, or the length of your fabric, and that's going to be the warp or the grain line. So vertical. On these threads, we are going to weave our warp threads. So they're going to go across. So on each side, they're going to change the weave, make it a bit more packed to make up the selvage, then going back, and they're going to keep on going with that. You have 3 different types of weave that will give you 3 different types of fabric. But the principle is the same for all of them. This is your fabric, for example. Across the grain, you're not going to have any stretch. Across the cross grain, you're not going to have any. But on the bias, that's where your fabric is going to be very flexible and very stretchy. Just to highlight how it's important to follow the grain line, because I think it's important, here is my rectangle of fabric that is cut on the grain. So as you can see, there is no... And if you had to put two things together, they need to match. And if you don't follow the instructions of your pattern, you can have some problems. As well as when you cut things like collars that can stretch out of shape very easily because they tend to be cut on the bias. This one is cut on the bias, and I won't have any stretch on this side. However, when I do this, see, I have a big amount of stretch, and obviously if I stretch it for long enough, it's going to stretch out of shape. If I had to match those two together, well, the idea is that it should match. They're the same size. However, I've stretched this one out and now they don't match, as you can see. So one is bigger than the other. So that's the problem when you don't follow the grain lines. So I'll show you when we cut the pattern for first project how to place it and how to find it. So don't worry too much. So that's the main thing with woven fabric. So now moving on to knit. So even without knowing it, if you do knitting at home, you will have made knit fabric. You've got two different types of knit fabric, and you have weft knit and what knit. So weft knit is the stuff that you can make at home, and basically you make row after row after row and going from one side to the other, and this is your weft knit, and it can be made or at home or on a loom. Stuff like socks, sweaters and stuff like that can be made that way, even by hand. The other one is going to be the warp knit, and the weave is going to run vertically. So it will, I think that's why you have a four-way stretch, for example, is because it's running vertically, but because all the threads is looped around each other, that's what gives flexibility as such compared to woven fabric. Warp knit can only be done on a loom. It can't be made with knitting needles. And the third type is going to be non-woven. So you're going to have fabric made by bonding, and you're going to have fabric made by felting. Bounded fabric are going to be made with synthetic fibers, and you're going to have webs of synthetic fibers that are put together through heat or glue. And the best example of a bounded fabric is going to be a interfacing. So that's the stuff that you glue on your fabric to make it stronger and more stable. So stuff like felting, so that's going to be made from wool or animal hair. And that is going to be felted together through moisture and heat. So here I have felted this sweater by mistake, so it's way too small now for me, but it's okay because that's my cat that sleeps on it. It was thrifted, so I don't really care. So you can easily felt your stuff at home, wool sweaters and stuff like that at home with your washing machine and a bit of heat, simply because of the fibers that makes it. It's like all the fibers has those little hooks, so they just like act like Velcro in some weird way, and they attach to each other. And when your fabric is all scrunched up together, it just goes and then it bounces together and it shrinks. So felt fabric will not fray, will not stretch. It's going to be very, very warm, simply because you have all these fibers packed together. So these are our three main categories when it comes to fabric. Alright, so that's it for today. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions, as usual, you can leave them down below. And if you enjoyed this video, you can leave a thumbs up. You can also subscribe if you are not already. I would love to have you subscribe and join this little sewing community. And if you have any advice or tips and tricks to share with the community, please do in the comment section below. Well, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!